Hello everybody and welcome back to another Race to 8 series. Today we're going to go over the Lorehold Legacies preconstructed deck, and I suggest you pick up this deck because it has some of the best new cards I've ever seen in a preconstructed deck, and they're just going to shoot up in value. And actually, I used to think that the Prismari Performance deck was going to be the most expensive, but just seeing the cards in this deck, I would pick this up because this is going to be worth the most money. But if you're new to the Race to 8 series, it's a series where we upgrade the pre-constructed deck till it has a fighting chance against power level 8 decks or $500 decks, the normal decks you'd see in a playgroup. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing because it was my birthday this Wednesday, and it would just make me feel great if you just hit that subscribe button, just check out my channel and check out my videos. Also, if you want to support the channel in another way, my TCG affiliate link is down below, and it should be working now. I got it up and fixed, so everything should be working just fine. Now let's get right into this pre-constructed deck. And starting off this video, just like we do any other, we gotta choose the commander, and that starts off with Oscar the Reconstructor. Costing 4 mana, 2 colorless, and a Boros. It's a 4/4 vigilant creature. It has 2 abilities. The first ability, you just pay 1 mana and you can sacrifice an artifact and give target creature you control +2/+0. First of all, that's a great ability. Just being able to have a sack outlet for 1 mana is great if someone has like a way to exile your stuff or other things, but the second ability is so powerful. We get to pay X and tap it, and we get to exile an artifact from our graveyard that has mana value X, and then we get to create 2 copies of that card. Oh my god, this is so powerful, because now all of a sudden, powerful artifacts that only cost 1 mana, we can double it up. Like, just think of Soul Ring with this deck. We get to tap it for 2 mana, sacrifice it for 1 mana, and then we get to make 2 copies using this commander. This commander is absolutely insane, and that's why we're choosing this as our commander. As far as the upgrades go, we did 3 main things, and we focused on ways to get stuff in our graveyard. Secondly, we just focused on artifact synergies, and lastly, just commander synergies, cards that really synergize with our commander specifically, and just got more powerful with our commander. When we try to get artifacts in our graveyard, we have 3 main ways to do it, and it starts off by discarding cards. So we have 2 cards in this category, and that's Cathartic Reunion and Thrilling Discovery. Now these cards are basically the same, and they have us discard 2 cards to draw 3 cards. The reason I really like these cards is synergy is amplified when you put good cards in your deck, and these are just good cards. So you just want cards that have a really good effect, and all of a sudden if they have synergy with your commander, now all of a sudden that synergy gets amplified because these cards are already good. And this is probably some of the best ways to draw cards in Boros in general. So that's why these are very good for the deck. And as far as other ways to get artifacts in our graveyards, it's sacrifice outlets. So our commander is one way because it's already a built-in sacrifice outlet, but the other way that's a little bit more spendy is Grinding Station, costing only 2 mana, but we can tap and sacrifice an artifact, and then we can have target player mill 3 cards. Now not only are we going to sacrifice an artifact to put it in our graveyard, now we're going to get to mill 3 cards because we're always going to choose ourselves. And then it also untaps every time an artifact comes into play under our control, which means we can use this ability over and over again, get more artifacts in our graveyard, and then we can use our commander ability again and again. And the last way is to tutor it in our graveyard, and that's Goblin Engineer, costing only 2 mana. It's a 1/2 that says the ability, when it enters the battlefield, we can search our library for an artifact, converted mana cost 3 or less. We get to put it in the graveyard, and it has a sacrifice ability too for 1 and a red, and we can sacrifice an artifact to put an artifact with converted mana cost 3 or less onto the battlefield. Now this is great to just tutor up a Soul Ring and sacrifice an artifact, and now we get 2 copies of Soul Ring. And we can put any other artifact in our graveyard as well. So this card is just so amazing in our deck. And now we've got to get into the next category, which is artifact synergy, and it starts off with the best possible card money can buy. It doesn't matter how much money you got, this card needs to go into your deck, and that's Forsaken Monument. Costing 5 mana, this, whenever we tap for colorless, we add an additional colorless, but not only that, it also gives artifact creatures we control +2/+2, but wait, there's more. We can also gain 2 life every single time we cast a colorless spell. I mean, there's not much else to be said. Just the first ability is good enough in our deck because we're going to have a lot of artifacts that tap for mana. But having just our creatures get bigger, as well as gaining life. Artifacts don't really have a good way to do that. Just having that on a card is awesome. And the next card I would add is Gearper Aether Grid, costing 3 mana. This is an enchantment, so it's going to be really hard to kill, and we can tap 2 untapped artifact to deal 1 damage to any target. Now, I really like this card because it counts as a removal spell, and it just gives our artifacts another way to deal damage without having to do anything. For example, when we have a lot of artifacts on the battlefield, we can just have a bunch of mana and not have anything to do with it. So this gives our artifacts another way of just killing our opponents and also dealing damage to creatures. So being removal and also damage. And another card that falls directly in line with that is Reckless Fireweaver. Now, I've added this to every artifact deck that I have. I have a Brea deck, and this slots perfectly in there. It says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, we get to deal 1 damage to each opponent. Now, this is going to kill so many of our opponents very quickly, because every time we use our commander's activated ability, we just deal 2 damage to each of our opponents because we make 2 artifacts. Enough said. And the single best Artifact Matters card that you can add to your deck is Scrap Mastery, costing 5 mana. This sorcery doubles up as a removal spell and one of the best cards in our deck. Since we're going to be putting a lot of artifacts in our graveyards, what this card does is we exile all of the artifacts from our graveyard, and each player does the same. And then we sacrifice all the artifacts on our board, and then return all artifacts from graveyard onto the battlefield. Basically meaning that all of our opponents are just going to have to sacrifice our artifacts, and then we get to return all artifacts from our graveyard. Because most people aren't going to want their artifacts in the graveyard. So this is a great way to even deal with indestructible artifacts as well. But we get to put like 10 artifacts into play because of this card. For example, if we have a grinding station out, you know how good that card is, and now we're going to have so many artifacts in our graveyard already, and we can just sacrifice them, put them in the graveyard before this ability triggers, and then just have all of our artifacts come back into play. Now, the next card is so awesome in any artifact deck, and if you have an artifact deck, put this card in there, and that's Inspiring Statuary. And this costs 3 mana and gives all of our artifacts improvised. That means we can tap any of our untapped artifacts and help cast cards from our hand. So for example, we play, I don't know, Scrap Mastery, and then we have 3 artifacts on the battlefield. We can tap each one of those artifacts for 1 colorless mana on that Scrap Mastery. Now all of a sudden, it only costs 2 red. And the last card I would add is Teshar's Ancestor's Apostle, costing only 4 mana. Whenever we cast a historic spell, we get to return a creature with converted mana cost 3 or less from our graveyard on the battlefield. Now we're going to have a lot of artifacts that are creatures as well, and this is just a great way to just get them from the graveyard back into the battlefield, because we're going to have plenty of ways to get our artifacts into the graveyard. Now this last and final category is dedicated to cards that specifically synergize with our commander, and it starts off with Coveted Duel, and this is the perfect example of this, because it's just about bad in every other commander deck, but in this deck it is amazing, and it costs 6 mana, and when it enters the battlefield you get to draw 3 cards, and it can tap for 3 mana of any one color. Now the reason it's so bad in any other deck is because whenever you get attacked and 1 or more creatures are unblocked, all of a sudden your opponent gains control of this card and they get to draw 3 cards, helping your opponent out a ton. But the amazing part with this commander is our commander can not only bring this artifact back to get 6 cards, because we get to make 2 copies, and it taps for 6 mana, but also, if our opponents ever attack us with this card on the battlefield, all of a sudden we get to pay 1 mana and sacrifice it at instant speed, so we never have to worry about our opponents gaining control of this. Now you can also use this as a politicking card, and just if our opponents are down in cards and we know that we can take advantage of this card by getting it back ourselves to draw more cards, maybe we can let this pass around the table. But this is so good with our commander. Now the next card that's just like this is Mishras Bobble. Now this is normally not a good card in any other commander deck, but in this deck it's perfect because it costs 0 mana. So we can just activate our commander's ability, our second ability, for free because it costs 0 mana. And we get to make 2 copies of this. And then we can to sacrifice this artifact, look at target players, the top card of their library, and then we get to draw a card at the beginning of the next upkeep. So basically for 0 mana, now we get to draw 2 cards, which is a great rate, and you can't beat it anywhere in Commander itself. And the next card that I'm going to go over that synergizes with our Commander is Zeta the Dawnbreaker, costing 3 mana, and it makes all activated abilities cost 2 less mana. Not only are we going to have a few activated abilities in our Commander deck in general, all of a sudden, any artifact out of our graveyard that we want to get back with our Commander costs 2 less mana. So we're going back to Coveted Jewel, costing 6 mana. All of a sudden we get to pay 4 mana, and now we still get to draw 3 cards and tap for any 1 color of mana for our Commander as well. So this card is just perfect for there. And the next card that's perfect and a little bit stacksy, if you like it, then you should definitely add it. If you don't like it, I completely understand. But I think this is super important in Commander to have a rule of law type effect, and that's Ether Swarm Cannonist, and costing 2 mana, a colorless, and a white. It's a 2/2 body. It says whenever a player casts a non-artifact spell, they cannot play any more non-artifact spells on their turn. The reason I think this card is amazing for Commander is, first of all, it's not really going to harm us because we're going to have so many artifacts in our deck, and most of our creatures are also artifacts as well, so that doesn't really harm us. Secondly, Commander is all about having one big explosive turn. Now, if you know an opponent plays cards with a low CMC and they just want to chain together a bunch of spells in one turn, this is the perfect card to stop them. And Commander is all about checks and balances, and this can really make sure that your opponents play to the same level and slow down the pace of the game, which favors you because you're going to get a bunch of value. Now the last card, I think you should add this to every red deck, and I've already said this in every future video, and people still don't understand. This is a $200 card for $4 or $5 now. It's Underworld Breach, costing only 2 mana. We get to play any card out of our graveyard by just exiling 3 cards and paying the casting cost of that card. For example, a Mishras Bobble in our graveyard costs 0 mana. We just exile 3 cards out of our graveyard, and now we get to play Mishras Bobble again and again by exiling 3 cards. So this is perfect for the deck because we want stuff in our graveyard, and all of a sudden we can get rid of that stuff in our graveyard to cast the most important spells again and again. So great card in the deck, definitely add it. So that just about wraps everything up. So lastly, I just want to go over some more expensive cards that you can add to this deck if you don't have a price tag or want to upgrade this deck further in the future. And it all starts off with strong artifacts and really low CMC artifacts that we can put in our graveyard and cast with our Commander. And it starts off with cards like Mana Vault and Mox Opal and Lotus Petal. Those are the best examples of cards that you can put into this deck. And last card that you should also add is also Anointed Procession, doubling out the output of all of the tokens. So all of a sudden, instead of creating 2 token copies, we create 4 token copies. This is a great card for this deck. And now we want to go over the final price tag and what everything came out to. And lastly, it came out to, drumroll please, $52, which I think is great because what I did here is I did less upgrades than normal, but I wanted to focus on really high impact cards because this deck was really well built, and I strongly suggest you pick it up. And lastly, if you just want a succinct list of all the cards that I added and took out to the deck, they're all going to be in the tapped out link down below, and you can go and check that out. But that's going to be it for me, guys. I gotta go celebrate my birthday. It was this Wednesday, and we're going to do a bunch of fun stuff this weekend, so a lot of games coming. That's it for me, guys. Patchwork Commander is out.